Welcome back. In today's France 24 debate, we're talking Ukraine, and in particular the latest developments and the reaction to the staged murder of the anti-Kremlin journalist Arkady Babchenko, who appeared to have been gunned down on Tuesday in a contract-style killing which was blamed on Russia. Well, he was only to service alive and well on live television the following day. Babchenko says that together with the Ukrainian secret services, he had been preparing that stunt for several weeks, and he's lashed out at critics of the staged killing, asking them to put themselves in his shoes. Well, in this debate, we'll be asking, to whose advantage has this bizarre sequence of events played out? And has all of this drawn attention to the dangers of speaking out against President Vladimir Putin? Well, in a moment, I'll put those questions to our panel, but first, a quick reminder of what happened.
A handshake and a hug from Ukraine's president. Petro Poroshenko congratulated the country's security forces for foiling an alleged Russian plot to kill Arkady Babchenko.
This operation was successful, and we did not allow them to accomplish this scenario. I gave instructions to the head of the intelligence services to organize security.
Just before this meeting, Babchenko stunned the world by appearing alive and well at a press conference in the Ukrainian capital. Less than 24 hours earlier, he was reported to have been shot and killed at his Kiev apartment. Ukraine security services, the SBU, said Babchenko's death had been faked to foil a very real plot on his life.
I was made aware 1 month ago. We thought things through and worked out the details. The result of that became a special operation where one person has been detained.
This video from the SBU purportedly shows the arrest of the Ukrainian citizen paid by Russian agents to organize Babchenko's murder. The suspect is alleged to have hired another Ukrainian to kill him. Kiev says this was part of a larger plan by Moscow to assassinate some 30 people on Ukrainian soil. Russia and Ukraine are still in conflict over Moscow's annexation of Crimea and its support for pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine.
Well, today we're joined here for the France 24 debate by former French ambassador to Moscow, Claude Blanche-Maison, who is also the author of Vivre avec Poutine, or Living with Putin. Thank you very much indeed for coming to see us. I'm also joined here in the studio by Denis Kolesnik, who is a political analyst at the Gagra Institute, which is based in Georgia. Thank you very much indeed for coming to see us. We're joined from Kiev by Alex Ryabchin, who is a member of the Ukrainian parliament. We're also joined from Kiev. Thank you so much for joining us, I should say. Thank you so much to Katerina Kruk, who is a fellow at the think tank Kremlin Watch and also an expert on debunking fake news. Let's start by just listening in to how a Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, reacted to that news that Babchenko is in fact alive and well.
The story is strange, to say the least. I don't know how much the end justifies the means in this story. Thank God that the person is alive. It does not change her attitude towards Ukraine, a country where being a journalist is dangerous. It does not change the core of the situation. The only thing that has changed is that, thank God, this person is alive.
Okay, the words of the Kremlin there, saying this is indeed a strange sequence of events and they're glad that Babchenko is indeed alive. Let me start by asking you, former French ambassador to Moscow, Claude Blanche-Maison, to whose advantage does this sequence of events play out, do you think?
Well, I'm not surprised that Mr. Peskov, the speaker for Kremlin, said that. He's saying that the main result is that Babchenko is alive. And before hearing him, I was going to say the same, because after all, so many journalists are threatened all over the world. I mean, that's good news that this one, who has been threatened, is alive. But the whole plot, of course, is a piece of concern, because fake news, fake murder, maybe fake inquiry, so where are we going to? And of course, the word of the Ukrainian authority is now shaky in a way, which is a good news also for Moscow, for Kremlin people.
Let me turn to you, Denis, ask you pretty much the same question. This was a propaganda coup for who?
Actually, I wouldn't really treat it as a propaganda coup because, first of all, we speak about the fake, we speak about propaganda, but actually we should be speaking about Clausewitz and Sun Tzu. Because Ukraine, contrary to our country, our France, Ukraine is in war actually with Russia, whether it's official or non-official war. It's a proxy war, which means they have to act maybe in a more straightforward way and apply some tactics that maybe we wouldn't actually approve. So for me, it's not really about the propaganda coup. But for me, it was actually strange to see Peskov speaking about Ukraine as a place where a journalist is dangerous to be a journalist. Russia is like I don't really actually remember, but Russia has almost the worst ranking in terms of security of journalists. So I was pretty much astonished by the comment from Peskov.
Peskov saying that indeed, yeah, Ukraine is a dangerous place to be a journalist. But I think a lot of people, as you say, would say the same thing about Russia. Let's go to Kiev and ask Alex Ryabchin, member of the Ukrainian parliament. Were you as surprised as everyone else when you saw Babchenko alive and well on live television?
Yeah, I was extremely surprised because, like the day before, all my Facebook feed was full of mourning about Mr. Babchenko, who was a great journalist, and I was astonished by seeing his life. The first emotion was like great that we did it, and finally, our security service received a credibility inside Ukraine because we had previously assassination of journalists, assassination of former Russian MPs who were in exile in Kiev. That was never investigated fully and never prevented. And now finally our security service received credibility inside Ukraine, but unfortunately we have questions of trust outside. And let's speak about this also.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, I mean, why, what's the sort of the rationale behind this? What are the Ukrainian sources and Ukrainian officials that you're talking to saying about why they did this bizarre thing, which to the rest of the world, it's sort of really unprecedented staging of someone's killing in your capital city?
Yeah, I agree, but we should define definitely that there is Russian propaganda and creating a parallel reality, and there is this kind of special sting operation that was done by Ukrainian special services to find out who ordered this assassination, who did this, so just to receive more proofs. I agree with you that this is a bit bizarre. I don't know why they need to assassinate, let's say, him, why they have not created the reality that maybe he's in critical condition. I don't know. This is a question that we will definitely ask to our security service. You know, I'm from opposition political party, Fatherland, and we will definitely ask for more why they did this, and they need to show proof that they definitely require this. But
yeah, they went to great lengths. They covered him.
Hybrid war.
They covered him in pig's blood. They took him to a morgue. Apparently, the wife was in the dark. I mean, they went to really great lengths to make this look as real as possible. And let me turn to you, Katerina Kruk in Kiev. I just want to know what you think has been the overall reaction from people there in Kiev to this strange sequence of events these last couple of days.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking this topic for a debate. And I would really very much agree with previous colleagues of mine, Ukrainian ones, who mentioned that there is indeed a difference of reactions among Ukrainians and in the Western audience. Because obviously the first reaction of Ukrainians when they found out that the very trusted and very popular public figure, journalist, who is very well known in Ukraine, is killed, obviously was absolutely tragic, and everyone was overwhelmed with this news because we are at war with Russia, and every single day we are receiving reports that someone was killed, but losing such a dear person was a great shock. Even the bigger shock was to find out that he's alive and everything was a staged operation by SBU. Me, myself, when I just learned that Babchenko is alive, my first reaction was that it might be some fake news, but obviously, luckily, it was true. I saw also something which shows a very healthy reaction of Ukrainians, because I saw a lot of humor, and actually it was initiated by Babchenko himself, because one of the first posts on Facebook that he's done today was actually about that, well, let's laugh about it, and people started sending him a lot of memes, and everyone really felt relief, because Ukraine is facing so many bad and dark news almost every single day, that learning that one of those news was actually untrue is a great relief for us. Unfortunately, the reaction of Western audience, and also journalists, first of all, who are covering Ukraine, has been absolutely different. And to be honest, me, myself, I've been working on Twitter with the English-speaking audience for more than 4 years now, ever since the beginning of Euromaidan revolution. I was surprised to how personally many people took this event as someone wanted to deceive them personally, and they really didn't want for some time to look at the entire situation, that it was an operation aimed at saving the life of the person, of someone who is dear to them according to the condolences they shared, and not the fake news operation. As a person who is working on this information and on this specific issue, I would really very much disagree with the very term that that one of you have used, that this is the fake news. This was just a part of operation. And fake news, which are being used by Russia, they are used to deceive the audience. SBU, the moment when they were ready and they were able to share information, they went out publicly and they explained everything. So this is not the case of the fake news.
Okay, but aren't you concerned, and this is a question to the panel as well, that perhaps from here on after, we're going to have difficulty if there's a major announcement that's made by Kiev, we're all going to be wondering whether perhaps it's another stunt of some description, or there may be some element of doubt in our minds. What are your thoughts, Ambassador?
That's of course a risk, because at first sight it seems to be a very good plot, very clever plot. But on second sight, and maybe on a long term, from a long term point of view, it is too clever by half. Plot, because it could return against the Ukrainian authority by putting in doubt any declaration from their side, whether it is serious or not. And so it's of course it's a very dramatic decision which has been taken in Ukraine to stage this whole thing just to save this journalist and to find out who was going to try and kill him, if it's the case. Which of course remains to be demonstrated. And
isn't there sort of a concern that this could also play into the hands of Russia, that says, I told you, the Ukrainian government and Ukraine, everyone's out to get us, putting out these stories that aren't true, just to tarnish our image. Isn't that something that could be a consequence of these events?
Russia will definitely try to play this card. That's clear, and they are pretty good at it. But at the same time, I have to remind to our audiences that the security service of Ukraine had and still has actually quite a bad image in Ukraine and within the democratic world, because the persons who work there and who have worked there, they were trained during the Soviet times, together with their Moscow colleagues, for instance. And the fact that they didn't share the information beforehand, they were afraid of leaks, I believe. And my little theory is that actually they managed to figure out who's been working from inside for Russians within their institution, which means definitely we won't be seeing it on the news, but I believe the other part of the story is actually fight against the double agents who work for Russia within the security service of Ukraine.
Let me just ask you, Alex Ryabchin, in Kiev, to what degree is it believed that Babchenko's life was actually in danger?
Well, we had a sequences of events when there was an assassination of the Russian or previously Russian citizens who were criticizing Putin's regime. And we are definitely in stage of war with Russia. Basically, it's hybrid war. It's not only military or economic war. It's a propaganda war. So basically, our security services put them on the risk, put their reputation on the risk by playing this plot. And I definitely agree that they need to show the real evidence to court and internationally that they require to do this kind of stuff. But let's be honest, there is low trust to the Ukrainian authorities internationally, because if there were trust before, when Ukrainians in 2014 stated that there is a Russian green man occupied Crimea, because nobody believed in this. There was no insignia, and we don't know whether it's Russian troops or not. We said the same, that there are Russian troops in Donbass, and they are shelling from Russian territory by Graz to Ukrainian soldiers. Nobody believed. Yet before, the independent journalists investigated this. Same with the Russian book that hit MH17 17. We said that this was Russian book. We never been there. We never had this type of a book. But Russia did a lot of mispropaganda, and yet not a lot of, like, there are some people who are doesn't believe that it's Russia. So we are playing on this game with a hybrid war. We responded hybridly. Maybe it's better to respond with trust and play on more trust building. But yet this is the this is the role that we choose. Definitely we need to show the evidence. But I promise you we will do the very big scrutiny on this. And the last one. We're going to talk Ukrainian Parliament. We have a law on national.
All right, we're going to talk more about the evidence. We'll talk more about the evidence in the second half. You've had the last word for the first half. Alex Ryabchin there, Member of Parliament in Kiev. Thank you so much for that. We'll be back in a couple of minutes with the top stories. Don't go away. Stay tuned.
Hello.
Welcome back. Time now for part two of the France 24 debate. Today we're talking about Ukraine and the global reaction to the staged murder of anti-Kremlin journalist Arkady Babchenko, who it turns out was not killed in front of his home on Tuesday. Well, together with our panel, we're discussing what was the object of the unusual exercise staging his murder, and to whose advantage does this play? Well, let's listen to what a Ukraine expert at the Chatham House think tank said about the rationale behind that stunt.
I think it has been a success that it saved the life of a journalist, that it led to a possible prevention of 30 other deaths, and it possibly led to an evidence of Russia's engagement in the territory of Ukraine to destabilize and to present Ukraine as a failed state where its law enforcement cannot protect. But it could undermine a very fragile trust that is already in Ukraine to law enforcement about the means and the tools and about the facts that are being presented as the facts, but then they turned out to be false.
Okay, and that was a Ukraine expert at Chatham House speaking there, saying she thinks it was a successful operation and that it has worked to Ukraine's advantage and saved the lives of several other journalists. Let me put that to Katerina Krug in Kiev, a fellow at the think tank Kremlin Watch. Let's just pick up on that point about how this stunt by the Ukrainian secret services has in fact saved the lives of other journalists. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, I would very much agree with the colleague from the Chatham House, but I would also like to remind that before my Ukrainian colleagues were mentioning also deaths and killings of other Ukrainian journalists and also how high-profile killings of Russian citizens that took place in Ukraine, but also would like to remind of a very high-profile killing which took place a few years ago. I believe it was in 2016, of the Ukrainian officer at SBU who was collecting evidence of Russian crimes in Donbass and in Crimea, meaning that this war of assassinations is taking place in Ukraine for a very long time, especially targeting people who are collecting evidence and presenting to the world the fact that Russia is indeed, has indeed invaded Ukraine and is responsible for many crimes against humanity and obviously violations of human rights. Now, going back to the point which was mentioned, and obviously the question that you asked, that we were able to save almost more than 30 people in Ukraine. Babchenko himself today during the press conference that took place, that was live just a few hours ago, mentioned that he wasn't the highest ranking person on the list. This is the only thing that he could disclose, the only thing that he knows from the SBU. And Russians himself explained and described him as a low-ranking journalist and so on and so forth. So we have all the reasons to believe that he was the key element to uncover the entire operation and to prevent even high-profile killings who might target Ukrainian journalists as well, but also probably Ukrainian politicians.
Yeah, you mentioned that press conference at which Babchenko spoke and saying he's basically just happy to be alive. I believe we can listen in now to an excerpt of what he had to say.
My goal was to stay alive and ensure the safety of my family. That is the first thing I'm thinking about. Journalistic standards are the last thing I'm thinking about now.
Okay, the man at the centre of this story. Let me put that to you here in the studio. Your thoughts on what this operation has achieved, because some of our guests have been saying, and indeed the expert at Chatham House is saying, that this has prevented the lives of other journalists from being lost. It's also raised the profile of a serious problem, hasn't it? That if you speak out against Vladimir Putin in certain parts of the world, your life could be in danger.
Well, of course, I think Mr. Babchenko is right. I mean, after all, everybody is very happy that he's alive. Maybe it could protect also the life of other people who are threatened one way or another. But let's put it in a wider context, of course. I mean, next year we are going to have an election in Ukraine. And, of course, Mr. Poroshenko is expecting to be re-elected. And probably in making that choice, which was a very dramatic choice, because, after all, there were probably other ways to protect Mr. Babchenko than to stage a fake murder, which is an extreme choice and which put in doubt the word of the Ukrainian authority. So maybe it's also because Mr. Poroshenko wants to be assertive in view of the election of next year, and maybe also because he doesn't want any move towards any kind of reconciliation with Russia. Because after all, being in war in Russia, or in a certain kind of war, is the best way for him to be re-elected. And we can see, I mean, from the visit of the German Chancellor in Sochi a few days ago, the visit of Mr. Macron in Petersburg a few days ago, there are some moves to try to find a solution to put the Minsk agreement in operation. And I am not sure that Mr. Poroshenko is willing to do that.
Can I ask for a reaction from Alex Ryabchin? You're an MP and you're based in Kiev. What are your thoughts there on what Mr. Blanche-Maison was saying?
Yeah, I could agree with these words, because, like, I represent, for example, Yulia Tymoshenko political party, who is now the main popular candidate to become a president. And our position when we find out that Arkady Babchenko was assassinated, basically, we criticized the authorities, demanding from them to finally solve some cases. And yesterday, the general prosecutor just appointed to the words of Yulia Tymoshenko, saying, you see, those politicians that try to make political bonuses, but we did it. So Mr. Poroshenko, and he is appointed, the general prosecutor and the SBU, the head of SBU, they used this in internal political discourse to strengthen the Poroshenko's position, unfortunately. So, but definitely, I would say that the sting operation to save life of Mr. Arkady Babchenko and to reveal those 30 names or surnames that we find out that there is a list of politicians or journalists that could be also killed or assassinated, maybe it was worth it. But, like, I would like to say that in Parliament we have, in the second reading, a very important law on national security, when we will increase the control, the civil control on our security services. So this is what we are demanding, and I think that after adopting this law, we will never have these cases anymore, when our security services brought us a bit of mistrust to international society.
And just with regard to evidence that indeed Russia was plotting to kill Babchenko, I'm just wondering, I mean, there has been some video footage put out. We can look at some of it now. This is from a spy cam, which was inside the car where the hitman was in discussion with someone pretending to be the one issuing the contract for the life of Mr. Babchenko. I mean, from what you've seen, and I mean, I'll put this question to you. I mean, have you seen any evidence that strikes you as being solid and conclusive that indeed Russia really was trying to kill this man?
Let's say when Russia has invaded Crimea, their troops, they had no insignia, which means, speaking of evidence, it can be anything and everything. So I personally, I cannot neither confirm nor refute whether there were Russians behind it. But taking into account the recent history of car bombings in Ukraine, that, for instance, the chief of foreign security services, I mean foreign intelligence, he's been assassinated in Kiev, and another journalist was killed as well. So who would actually benefit from it? I mean, if you see the international reaction, the journalist has been killed in Kiev. Oh, Ukraine is a failed state. Ukraine didn't manage actually to protect him. And then actually he wasn't killed. why did you do it? So you see there is this problem that no matter what Ukraine does, it will be criticized.
Let's return to Katerina and ask you for what you think. Going back to this question of evidence, I mean, have you listened, for example, to the dialogue of that recording from the hidden camera between the supposed hitman and the supposed person putting out the contract on Babchenko's life? I mean, does this tell you conclusively that Moscow really was caught on camera trying to kill that man?
Well, first of all, before answering your question, I would like to answer part of the question that you asked of another guest of yours. What is the result of the entire operation? I think that one of the most important results are even the most public ones. Let's remember that it wasn't a public operation for international audience or even for Ukrainian audience. It had very strong and very solid intelligence component in that. And I think that probably the most important part that Ukraine achieved in this is that we were able to catch Russia or anyone who was preparing the assassination by surprise. Another thing that we were able to uncover the network of people who were planning the assassination, who were cooperating with the probable assassins, and obviously shaking their structure a little bit, because for them it would take some time in order to regain back the balance and go back to their mechanisms of work. So I think by doing this, we definitely have won some time for other security operations taking place. Obviously, there is also another interesting case, which it's very sad that hasn't been mentioned before by our panelists. Together with SBU and Prosecutor General of Ukraine, recently they have uncovered the plot, which still was very widely commented by the Western audience, with Nadia Savchenko. And they also presented a lot of evidence, and that proving that she was cooperating and people working with her, they were cooperating definitely with Donetsk occupation forces, which might lead them directly to Russians. Now, going back to your question, right during our break, I was checking Twitter, and SBU of Ukraine, like the official Twitter, they confirmed that they started issuing their official suspects in the criminal proceedings, meaning that they are ready to give more solid evidence. And we will see how they will be linked. Definitely the person that has been mentioned by the Radio Liberty, who is the most probable suspect in this case, he was previously working very closely with MPs from the Party of the Regions, a very pro-Russian party, whose president, Viktor Yanukovych, led to the killings on Maidan and later fled to Russia. So I still think that it's probably too early to look at all the evidence, because it looks like the SBU is definitely giving them part by part, portion by portion, because every few hours we get new confirmations, new evidence. So maybe in few hours, or maybe even tomorrow, we will know more. So far, unfortunately, we have to rely on the words of SBU. But last thing, I do very much hope that SBU, knowing that they made very loud case, both in Ukraine but also internationally, would understand that they really need to provide a solid proof, because so far, if they wouldn't, it would destroy the entire case and shred not only their credibility, but of the entire country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to put that question to Alex Ryabchin. I mean, it's really important, isn't it, that the evidence that's put forward to the rest of the world is absolutely conclusive, because if it isn't, Ukraine doesn't look quite as clever as it would if it did, and that's putting it mildly. What are your thoughts about where we are with the inquiry and the arrest that's been made?
Yeah, I completely agree with the previous speaker that yet we haven't received a solid evidence. Our security services giving them part by part, bit by bit, but this is their style of doing so. We are anticipating more solid evidence. I definitely know that they will have the viral type, these guys, so we will definitely receive more evidence. Yet we have a bit doubts about the credibility of our security services, the increases capabilities with this case. But yet, with the big fishes like occupation of Crimea, MH17, Russian troops, with big fishes, we never had any problems and never had any failure. So I truly believe that our security service, our institution will provide all the information required, and now even more, because honestly saying, I think they didn't count it on such a, such a strong reaction from the international community. Myself, I was working as a journalist for Washington Post in 2014, and I know quite sure that, liberal journalists with the, with the best standards of fact-checking are a bit concerned with the credibility. So we definitely need to work out on this to restore the trust on our institution. But if we will provide this solid evidence, that I truly believe that the trust will be restored.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you're saying as well, because Ukraine ought to be better placed than, say, France or the United Kingdom or one of the other countries that sometimes points the finger of blame at Russia at actually pinning something down, because people in Ukraine, on the whole, understand Russian, and you'd have thought that they would be better at beating Russia at their own game than, say, the average European government. Does that sound fair to you, Ambassador?
Well, I think, of course, that they are trying to do that, but it's true that we need more evidence, and the public opinion, journalists in Ukraine, outside Ukraine, need more evidence on what exactly was behind this choice, in fact. And again, I think that the life of Mr. Babchenko could have been protected by other means, less dramatic means.
24/7 surveillance.
Without staging this fake murder with some details which are not very verified, and probably by taking him out of the city and protecting him somewhere, and making maybe staging some kind of disappearance of Mr. Babchenko, and see what happens under protection of the SBU. But they have chosen to stage a murder and to go publicly to publicize this murder with photographs and with many details.
In all your years as a diplomat, have you ever seen anything that you could compare this to in terms of the unusual nature, shall we say, of staging the death of something? Have you ever heard of anything like this before?
No, I don't think so. I've seen in the press this morning that something happened in the 90s in France, when a refugee from Romania was threatened by the secret police of Romania and has been protected by the French Secret Service, but had been protected by putting him in a safe place and protecting him during all the time that it was needed to protect him. But I don't know more details about this issue, which was in another context during the 90s, in fact.
Okay, so a pretty unprecedented sequence of events. I just want to move on to the whole topic of fake news. And it's good to have Katerina with us, because, Katerina, of course, you're an expert on fake news and debunking it. And I'm just wondering, Ukraine, a deeply polarized country, with the East and the West, different sets of circumstances in two different parts of the country. How big a problem is fake news there in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, the thing that I would like to once again put into the context is that we should always remember that this was an operation aimed not only at protecting the life of Babchenko and also other 30 people, but first of all, uncovering the entire network of people who are planning assassinations in Ukraine. So I think when we're talking about what different measures could been taken by Ukrainian SBU, we should keep it in mind that Babchenko wasn't the only aim, the only target of them. When it comes to fake news in Ukraine, I would disagree a little bit with the depolarization of Ukrainians. It definitely has changed after Russia has attacked Ukraine back in 2014, because in a way, the biggest difference that was disuniting Ukrainians before that, which was, let's say, issues of language or of the history or the geopolitical choices, in a way, they all went away, because Russia, which was believed to be the biggest brotherhood nation of Ukrainians, proved to be an aggressor. Also, with Russian language in Ukraine, many people saw that Russian-speaking Ukrainians, they have absolutely patriotic position, and they go to eastern Ukraine to protect the country, meaning that language in Ukraine is not something which determines your political position or your citizens' position. Definitely, Russians has been very much flexible in their fake news techniques when it comes to Ukraine. We can see that in first year of the Russian annexation of Crimea and attack on Ukraine in 2014, I would say that the technique for 2014 and 2015 would be disseminating Kremlin narrative, saying that Crimea went away to Russia willingly. There is no Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine. There was a civil war. Then MH17 was shot by Ukrainians, and so on and so forth. But those Kremlin narratives, they proved to be highly unsuccessful in Ukraine. Most of the Ukrainians, they don't believe the biggest narratives of Kremlin about Ukraine, meaning that Russia has changed the tactics. So we can see that the biggest amount of time and energy and finance is being spent by Russians right now to use internal conflicts of Ukraine. So like they aren't producing the Kremlin narrative about Ukraine as such, but they are using political divisions, the dissatisfaction of Ukrainians in authorities, different quarrels which are happening in Ukraine. And this is also a technique which is being used against other states. So they aren't trying to use their financial power and also the media power in order to increase the soft power of Russia, meaning to make Russia look better, but in order to use the weaknesses of Ukraine and other countries.
All right, we're running out of time pretty quickly. Dennis, let me just turn to you. Of course, fake news, not just a problem for Ukraine, but fake news believed to have originated from Russia, a problem in other countries in the region as well, not least here.
Yeah, we have in France. We have the problem with the fake news. The election campaign of President Macron suffered from it as well, and the referendum in Scotland. We had as well the Russian meddling. Recently, there was a report published by the Spanish CNA. It's like security service agency, stating that there was a Russian meddling in the Catalonia affair. So we see that the information itself, we live in an era, in an epoch of information, and we see that information is used in order to advance the agenda of foreign states. And for instance, in France, here we'll be having recently a new law, a new legislation that will be debated by the National Assembly at the beginning of June regarding how actually we can protect our state from the meddling from other states using the media and the information.
Okay, so steps are being taken to try to fix the problem and to try to quell the flood of fake news internationally. Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. You've had the last word, Denis Kolesnik. Thank you very much indeed for coming to see us. Thank you very much indeed to you, former French ambassador to Moscow, Claude Blanche-Maison. Thank you very much. And thank you to our guests in Kiev, Alex Ryabchin, member of the Ukrainian Parliament. Thank you very much indeed to you for talking to us. And Katerina Kruk, fellow at the think tank Kremlin Watch. Thank you so much. I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you very much indeed to you for watching. Stay tuned to France 24.